Welcome back, all you lovely people. That last video was a little longer than I expected, but then I realized you guys are probably watching these all at like 2 times speed on Panopto. It's a cool feature. I don't object you from it. I just, I'm like, this good. Why not? It's okay. As long as you're getting what you need out of this, honestly, I don't care how you're consuming this material, as long as it's getting lodged somewhere. I mean, I hope you're taking notes, but hey, a man can dream, can't he? Anyhow, let's talk about law and ethics. Now, one common view, especially in business, but I think a lot of people, a lot of professionals tend to think that ethics, if you're just obeying the law, that's it. If it's ethical, it is legal, and vice versa. So the ethics doesn't go any deeper than what the law says it is. So what is right, what is good, that is whatever the law says it is, period. If the law doesn't punish you for doing it, then it's ethically perfectly fine. And it's worth noting, this is a actually, it might not seem that way, but this is actually a pretty bold claim of metaethics, because we're doing metaethics when we are talking about the nature of ethics and morality by claiming that nature, that essence of ethics is somehow tied to the law. And again, you're talking about how you're going to justify your claims in ethics, because if you claim that something's good or something's bad, you justify that by, I guess, talk to a lawyer, open a book on law. But that's how you're going to justify your claim, is simply by pointing out where the law stands on that issue. So that is a pretty surprisingly deep meta-ethical claim. And so we'll do a little bit of meta-ethics right now. Why not? It's fun. It's got meta in the name. When I took ancient Greek, yeah, it's the language I picked. That was pretty smart. I use it all the time. But meta is about this kind of cool word about stepping back and perceiving something from a new vantage. That's kind of cool. Anyway, you get things like metaphysical, X-Files maybe. Anyway, going beyond or past. It's kind of a cool term. Anyhow, so this legal view is a very interesting meta-ethical claim about the nature of morality being tied to the law. And so I gave you this short little, very simple article by Weinstein, looking at how it's spelled, because it lays out, I think, pretty clearly and in pretty simple language what I would think is the common sense view about the relationship between ethics and morality. Namely, Weinstein says they're different. They are not the same thing. And it would be wrong in some sense to think of them as the same. And he gives lots of examples, which is why this is a kind of cool article. I will say, if you're not satisfied by this article, we'll touch back on the relationship between ethics and law in future modules. We're going to talk about at the beginning of the next unit. We'll talk about the relationship between ethics and cultural norms. Ethics and cultural norms. That, I think, is probably the view that's really going on if you see a close connection between ethics and the law. So we'll come back to that and have, I think, a bit of a deeper analysis that goes on there. And then we'll even come back again when we read the works of Thomas Aquinas in Unit 2, where he does lots of effort to distinguish ethics, what he calls the natural law. Ethics, the natural law. It's what's for dinner.
Beef, it's what's for dinner.
He distinguishes all that from human law, which are like the laws that we're talking about today, the legal laws. But the thing in common is we're saying they're different. Ethics is not the law. And what I would like to show you is this video from an old TV show called The Practice that I liked when I was your age. Oh, man, actually, I was probably even older. Sad. But anyway, in this scene, I'm going to show you an older lawyer overhears this third-year law student talking to a potential client, this guy. And you'll see why the guy's there. It's pretty clear why the guy wants a lawyer. But the third-year law student is telling this guy that the law firm will not represent him because what the guy wants, the law simply cannot provide. Something happened, but the law will not punish the wrongdoer in this case. And this young third-year law student is trying to explain that to this man. But however, an older lawyer, as I mentioned, overhears this, played by Sharon Stone. She's delightful in this show. She's a great character in this show. Anyhow, she overhears this, and she comes in and says, you know what? I'll take this case and I'm going to win it. And then she explains to that third-year law student why she thinks she can win that case. And so watch this video. And as you're watching it, think about, why does the older lawyer believe they can totally win this case?
In my bed, the two of them. I since learned it's been going on for 6 years.
How long have you been married?
7.
Roland, Massachusetts is a no-fault state, which basically means that your wife's infidelity is a non-issue.
That's what I've been told, but this was... She didn't just cheat on me, Miss Wilson. She did so with my best friend. He was best man at our wedding. This just seems so wrong. I have 2 young kids. For me to come home and find out my wife, my children's mother, to learn it's been going on for 6 years?
Roland, it is horrible what your wife has done, but unfortunately, in a no-fault state, you have no remedy at law
I'll
for which...
represent you, Roland.
Sheila.
And I don't think we should just file claim against her. I think we should prosecute that best man as well.
Sheila?
I want you to continue giving the facts to Tara. And after that, we'll file a claim in Superior Court. We can expect a motion to dismiss, but surviving that, discovery should be short and we'll be in court in 3 months.
And we can win?
Roland, look at me. There's a reason you happened to walk into this law office after all those other lawyers turned you down. I win my cases. Not some of them, not most of them, every single one of them. And I shall win this case.
I realize that I'm only a third-year law student, but even I know that public policy won't let you litigate domestic disputes.
We need to appreciate on a deeper level that you are only a third-year law student. You see, every law can be bent, folded, or manipulated, so long as it conforms to fairness. So instead of taking issue, perhaps you would like to seize the opportunity to learn. You see, Tara, I will win. Aren't you just fascinated to see how?
All right, so I like that clip. It's cool. I want to know what's going to happen next. But Sharon Stone's character, the older lawyer, justifies this because she appeals to a difference between the law and what is fair. Or maybe she doesn't say this, but you can probably pick it up from it. You have on the one hand the law and what is right and just. And she's saying they're different, obviously. She doesn't explain why. We'll talk a bit about that in a moment. But she does note, and I think this is actually not crazy. I mean, maybe we have some law students who will send me nasty emails saying, but professor, yeah, send those to sorryNotSorry@gmail.com. You know my email. I'm gonna get letters. I always get letters. But I think even law students realize this to a certain extent, that judges and juries will do what they can to bend the law to fit notions of fairness. I think that is not crazy. If the law does not appear to be just or fair or right, judges and lawyers will oftentimes bend the law in that direction. Already then, that's saying they have to be different, because otherwise what's the law bending to if it's the same as ethics? Now, to the older lawyer, this seems obvious, that ethics and law are different. Again, I think this is pretty commonsensical, but I think it's worth unpacking why common sense might think this, that why are ethics and law different? Maybe pull out your little notebook and just take a minute, just a minute. I hope you have the notebook out anyway. You shouldn't be pulling it out. You should have it writing down all these beautiful thoughts I'm having. No? Okay. And pull it out, and then just take a moment. Write down, why might ethics and law be different? If you read the article, this is probably an easy question, but think about it. Why? What's different about them? I hope you did it. I can't peer through this camera. Let's see. That would be creepy if I could. That would not be ethical and probably illegal. Hey, they line up. But why? Well, I like that Weinstein approaches this in a couple different ways that I'll just quickly go through. I assume he did the reading. It's not that difficult. But one thing he very interestingly notes is that why be ethical, why be legal, are often quite different. I mean, why be legal? Well, I assume it's that you don't want to go to jail. You don't want to get sued. Yeah, you know. And so there's very self-interested reasons for obeying the law. It's very practical in that sense of just, I don't want to go to jail, so I'll obey the law. And so the question, why be ethical? Why do it? And this is actually a very deep and difficult meta-ethical question. And so I'm not going to go into those deep, deep waters. But I think Weinstein does, again, what common sense says is like, I think I'll read his quote here. I have it written down. I don't think I'm going to pop it up because it's not that awesome of a quote, but it's pretty simple. It's just the reason to do the right thing is simply because it is the right thing to do. It's like on the last page, I think, where he says this. The reason to do the right thing is because it's the right thing. And if what we mean by ethics is that ethics is literally the right thing to do, well, why should I do the right thing? Well, it's right. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how satisfying that is to you all, but there's really no other answer. And that's why I said this is a very difficult meta-ethical question that I'm not going to wade into. But clearly, the reason for being ethical is far different from the reason to be legal, to obey the law. The law has a police and an enforcement, usually. But I think we can dig a little deeper, at least insofar as we get lots of examples that I think shows you the fact that they're just different. Because there's plenty of examples of being unethical while obeying the law. And the example from the video I just showed, it's unethical to cheat on your spouse, but in most societies, that is not breaking the law. So it's legal to cheat on your spouse or commit infidelity, but I hope that seems morally wrong for a lot of reasons. Weinstein's article opens up with that example of the drunk driver. It seems that it would be ethical to take the keys away from a drunk driver, but legally we're often not required to do that. Maybe if you run a bar, maybe, not always true. But for us witnesses, as Weinstein says, witnesses are not obligated to intervene in most cases. Very rarely are there Good Samaritan laws or things where a stranger has to intervene. So again, another example of where it seems ethical to stop them from driving, but the law does not require that. So again, we're just going through examples of being unethical while obeying the law. It's wrong to cheat on your spouse. The law won't get you. It's wrong to let a driver drive drunk, but the law doesn't require you to stop them. And then he gives those, of course, dramatic historical examples that slavery was once legal in the antebellum South. That's wrong. If you think slavery is okay, again, maybe this course isn't for you. I've had students say that, but like, what's the big deal? I'm like, ooh, do I call the dean on this? I don't know. It was very uncomfortable. Please, if you think that, don't tell me. Another thing that's legal but unethical, denying women the right to vote. Women should be able to vote, though now apparently on Twitter I'm reading that they shouldn't vote. The older you get, the crazier life gets. I can't wait till you're my age. What you're going to have to deal with. Oh my gosh. Super Nazis. I don't know what's next. Anyway. And one last thing, like racial segregation laws. One time were perfectly legal, but I hope we can agree, highly unethical. So again, and I don't think it's very difficult to concoct or come up with examples of where the law lets you do unethical things. And then, of course, he doesn't go into this, which I find is strange, but maybe he doesn't want to be controversial, because I will say that sometimes these examples do get more controversial, but also I think you can find examples of being ethical while disobeying the law. So we kind of flip it around a bit. And look, that's the whole civil disobedience movement. Civil disobedience is based on the idea that these laws themselves are unethical. So I am going to engage in activity that is illegal, but it is perfectly ethical. This is when we think about Henry David Thoreau, refused to pay tax for a war he thought was unjust. I think it was the Spanish-American. Oh man, my history. I think it was the Spanish-American War. I forget. But he didn't want to pay his taxes because he thought that war was fundamentally unjust. Perfectly legal, fundamentally unjust, he thought. Or Martin Luther King Jr., another profound proponent of civil disobedience. Read his letter from Birmingham jail if you haven't already. Very clear notion that, again, segregation, Jim Crow laws, highly unethical, but legal. And so the ethical thing to do is break the law in protest of those unethical laws. And then in India, of course, Mahatma Gandhi, also huge proponent of civil disobedience, seeing the laws of colonialism and British rule as being fundamentally unethical. And so the right thing to do, the ethical thing to do, is to break those laws in protest. Okay. And one last thing I want to mention is that's probably a good idea to keep law and ethics separated. Because if you think about infidelity, again, the example from the video, it would be quite interesting and difficult, I think, to enforce such a law. And as we go down with immoral behavior, we reach the usual problems of what's immoral, how do we define it, and then what are the laws going to exactly look like? And I think we worry that this will become very totalitarian very quickly. And so we want some things are going to be legal but wrong, and we kind of got to suck that up because we can't regulate everything. And as a second worry, there can often be unintended consequences to trying to legislate morality. In some cultures, I'll pick on Iran here since that's the one I'm familiar with. Infidelity has been illegal for a long time, and if you cheat on your spouse, you could go to jail. And for a time, the punishment of infidelity was death by stoning, possibly still practiced in remote villages in Iran, but technically no longer true. But not that long ago, if you were found to have committed infidelity, you could be stoned to death. And there's movies and stuff that depict this. It's brutal. But what turns out, and maybe you're okay with that. Oh, well, maybe not stone them, but punish them. But what we see historically is pretty consistently that when you make infidelity illegal, who does that affect? The women. Men are very seldom punished by anti-infidelity laws. It's the women who end up being stoned to death, the men excused. And often they blame the woman for it as well. Similarly, anti-prostitution laws. You might think the selling of one's body through a sexual encounter is immoral. But when we try to regulate it, it seems that it's the women, the prostitutes, who are overwhelmingly punished and not the men who are paying for those services. It's interesting. And there's been some interesting response. You Google that stuff, but there's been some interesting ways people have tried to deal with that. But again, my point is more general. Trying to make morality and the law line up can either create a totalitarian state, let's cover, regulating everything about you, or even if we pick certain things like prostitution or infidelity that we might think are wrong, but then actually making the law do that can lead to unintended consequences, often on gender bounds that are pretty sexist, to say the least, for whatever reason. I am not a sociologist, so I won't go into why, but the fact that that happens is pretty indisputable. So putting it all together, I hope this has all made it clear why ethics and the law are different. We obey them for different reasons. We obey the law to avoid punishment, obey ethics. Maybe the best we can just say is because, well, by definition, ethics is the right thing to do. We've seen also that ethics and the law require different things from us, where there can be ethical things that are illegal and there can be legal things that are unethical. And finally, I concluded rather quickly with some reasons about why it's probably good to keep ethics separate from the law. Namely, it would be very difficult to legally control all behavior, all morality. Be totalitarian and very intrusive, to say the least. But even before that, unintended consequences of trying to legislate morality can get quite burdensome. All right, that's, I think, enough. We'll take another quick break. When we come back, we'll do a little applied ethics, looking at how Johnson & Johnson handled a major crisis that affected them in the 1980s. This is a case mentioned in the Weinstein article. And we'll see that Johnson & Johnson went way above and beyond what the law expected them to do. And what happened next? See you back here shortly to find out.